All right. Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, we are at the beginning of July. How about that? How did that happen so quickly?
I do not even know. I am at a loss for words on that one.
Like 6 months just came and went. It's like, oh my gosh,
Yep.
do you feel behind on life like I do, like every
Mm-hmm.
day? But it's all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
But look, I think given the news cycle, given how we are continuously inundated, and Lisa, I think what is it called? We need a word that's kind of like chronic fatigue, but it's chronic information overload or something because it
Mm.
just makes it feel like the time goes even faster than it already was.
Yeah.
But
Yep. Yep.
anyway, but here we are. We're going to try to highlight a couple of things rather than all of them when it comes to things that stuck out to us this week. But let's get into our word of the week. So, our word of the week or concept of the week is a little phrase that I've used pretty often, especially as a dialogue facilitator, and it is the phrase both and. Both and. Some of you all may not have heard this at all in conversation, and some people may think, okay, I think I know what this means. Maybe it's even overused in your circles. But Lisa, what I think is interesting about both and as we continue to try to use it, especially in tough conversations, is that we wanted to make sure that everyone that participated really thought through the notion that multiple seemingly contradictory truths can still exist at the very same time, right? Because usually we live and function in this binary. It's either this or that. It's one thing or the other. It's literally black or white, for example. And Lisa, we have thrown the word messy around a lot when it comes to this podcast. And I think we need to do that intentionally with phrases like both and. So it's one that I've continued to hear, and frankly, I'm guilty of using a lot, Lisa, but it's one of those phrases that we really need to use in order to make sure we break down these binaries that oversimplify ideas, experiences, life experiences, and hopefully helps us to be more empathetic where we
Mm-hmm.
understand that everything isn't really neat, if you will.
Yeah. I love both and I use it a lot. I am probably one of the
Yeah.
yeah, I propagate its usage all the time.
Right, right.
Because I think, I mean, as you age, your ability to
Yeah,
think in more complex ways and hold multiple truths is theoretically supposed to grow and develop, right? Like kids are not very good at this both end. But adults should
that's
be.
true.
And
Oh, yeah.
yet, and yet.
And yet we are not,
Mm-hmm.
theoretically,
Mm-hmm.
and yet we are not. So, yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's really important. Dr. Lisa, you and I have led and been a part of trainings where we have really pushed people to think
Mm-hmm.
more critically in this way, where there's a menu of responses, a menu of experiences, a menu of opinions, rather than oversimplifying. So I think it's really important. So continue to think about this. And Lisa, I kind of dare our listeners to
Mm-hmm.
try to use both and in everyday conversation with someone.
Right. Yeah.
Just like I did when I ran into a friend of mine and we were talking about Beyonce, and we were talking about the both and of not really enjoying her music, but absolutely studying her business practices. And that seems to be the craziest thing. But
Mm-hmm.
yet the both and of that is true for us. So think about where you can insert a both and conversation, whether you're talking about Beyonce or anything else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that segues us pretty nicely to the first phase because I want to talk about critical thinking. So a few weeks ago, there was a massive protests around the country, the No Kings protest, and there were an abundance of excellent signs that people had come together. And I don't think this one was unique to where I was, because I've seen it in other places. And Shaunna, I think you've seen it too. And it said, lack of critical thinking, the other national deficit. And so that just made me chuckle, and I had to take a photograph of it, because I am always, in addition to apparently saying both and, I am always lamenting what I believe to be the decline of critical thinking in our culture and people's seeming inability to do it. So what I thought would be funny, Shaunna, is I went online and looked up some different definitions of critical thinking, right? Because you and I have used this term on the podcast, and we likely use it in conversation with others. But to your point, who are we talking about the same thing, right? So I want to get your reactions from these definitions that I'm going to read out. So the first one was just a plain old Google search. What is the critical thinking definition? And that brought up Oxford Languages, and they define it as the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. Okay, so then we'll go to Merriam-Webster, so another dictionary, and they say the act or practice of thinking critically as applying reason and questioning assumptions in order to solve problems, evaluate information, and discern biases. I feel like that's getting a little better. Then we have the NEA, National Education Association. They say critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. So more complicated still, right? As you can see, we're getting a little bit more deep here. So the last one, oh no, I've got two more. So the University of Michigan said critical thinking is built upon an attitude of curiosity, skepticism, and humility. The thinker improves the quality of their thinking by skillfully analyzing, assessing, and reconstructing it. Critical thinking is self-directed, self-disciplined, self-monitored, and self-corrective thinking. It attempts to reason at the highest level of quality in a fair-minded way. And then the last one I want to say is by this scholar named Edward Glaser, who was a scholar at the Teachers College at Columbia University back in the 1940s. And he wrote a piece on critical thinking, which was groundbreaking for the time in 1941. And he said that critical thinking involves three components. The first is attitude. So you have to have an attitude of being inclined to consider in a thoughtful way the problems and subjects that come within the range of one's experiences. Two, you have to have knowledge of the methods of logical inquiry and reasoning. And three, you have to be skilled in applying those methods. So you have got a whole gamut there, from a handful of words, one sentence, all the way through to something much more robust as we start to think about it. So what are your reactions to those definitions?
Well, I picked up on some keywords that you gave me there for each one. Oxford turned me off as soon as I heard objective.
Okay.
Because I feel like, again, that is what we have learned and studied, especially for those of us who really love data and love data from all lived experiences, that that's just not even possible. Objective. I mean, like, really? That might be a goal of someone's, but that's not reality.
Right.
And so we all bring in some sort of bias or lens that we understand and evaluate an issue. So throw that one out. NEA, when it comes to this intellectually disciplined process, well, shit, that's the problem right there. We're not disciplined enough to do it. It's just, I mean, we really do have a culture that rewards, how can I say? We have a culture that rewards speed.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying take forever, but I am saying that oftentimes what's that phrase that we use all the time, Lisa, around speed is the enemy of equity on many things, where we rush
Mm-hmm.
through things in such a way
Right.
that we exclude people's experiences that unfortunately we always get one particular viewpoint that usually is not people of color, usually is not women, usually is not LGBT perspective. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not feeling comfortable with the intellectually disciplined piece of things because I just don't have faith that we're going to do that in this country. Um, but I do like the Glazer approach of what's your attitude. We've even talked about this.
Yeah.
Maybe we didn't specifically say attitude, but we did say posturing when it came to what's your posture when it comes to thinking about
Mm-hmm.
things from various angles. So I'm flirting with Ed Glazer's definition there. I like that one a little bit better. Um, and the curiosity piece that you brought up from University of Michigan, well, I usually tend to lean in that direction anyway. Many of you know
Mm-hmm.
that I love the discipline and the field of dialogue, which hinges itself on curiosity, being curious about someone else's perspective, being skeptical of what I already know, and being humble enough to take in what other people know as far as their
Mm-hmm.
experience. And so I would probably mix Glazer's and Michigan's definitions together, solely because we've talked about this in the last few episodes around how frustrating it has been for me to live in a country that really forces our hand sometimes to say that, status is connected with how many degrees you have and how many accolades you have. But then when you do have them, it's the anti-intellectual approach of, oh, well, if I Google it and if I use AI enough, I'll find an answer that's better than yours, even though you've spent your whole
Mm.
life studying this topic. And so that curiosity piece we don't find very often. Skeptical, I think that skepticism piece is important, but oftentimes we're skeptical of repeatable empirical data and information over decades. And we damn sure don't have any humility in this country. So my ideal would be the Glazer Michigan mix. That's my personal ideal, but I know we're far from it for a lot of people in this country. Far
Yeah,
from
I
it. And
mean,
I don't know how to get it either. That's my thing. I don't even know how to get it.
yeah, I think for me, what resonates out of all these ones that we found was the piece around the attitude or the openness, the curiosity. Because I think if you don't have that, if you are so entrenched in your position, and we see that and have talked about
Yeah.
this political polarization that's in this country, and this
Hmm.
is where the quote unquote sides are just getting further and further apart. Like if you look at scatter graphs of kind of Republican versus Democrat positions and voting patterns
Yes.
in Congress over decades, you can see that the blue and the red dots back in like 70s and 80s, there was a lot of blending in the middle, a lot of overlap there. And as we've gone
Hmm.
forward to today, those dots have just separated. And so now there's white space
Wow.
in the middle, and
Okay.
blue
Okay.
is on the left and red is on
Hmm.
the right. And
Hmm.
what that says to me is people have just become less willing to make compromise, less willing to hear other people's
Yes.
perspectives, and more entrenched. And I think you can still disagree with someone and be curious about why they feel the way that they feel, right? Like I don't think be,
Absolutely.
being curious and having an attitude of open investigation means that you necessarily have to then believe what it is that they're telling you per se.
Absolutely.
But that
Hmm.
critical, like you can't be a critical thinker
Hmm.
in any of these definitions. You can't be a critical thinker if you are not open to understanding that, or
Yeah.
recognizing that there is a different way to view the world. that it is a both end, right? That there are different
Mm-hmm.
experiences that lead people to different conclusions, and that, it's like when, you know, men say that sexism doesn't exist because they haven't experienced it. Well, no shit, you haven't experienced it because you're a guy,
Hello. That's the
right?
definition of sexism.
But so,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's not critic. So that's not a critical moment of thought, right? That is a because I didn't go through it, therefore it doesn't exist. Well, no, the critical analysis there would be to say, okay, this person who is dear to me or in my life is telling me that this is their experience. I want to understand
Mm,
that more, and maybe that's going to shift how I think about things. Maybe not, but
yeah,
I
yeah.
want a fuller, more colorful perspective of what it is like to live in the world based on different experiences, different identities, right? And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so when you just
Yeah.
take something at face value, that feels really troubling, and I don't know how to fix it, Shaunna. And you and I were
Mm.
talking off air about this focus on testing, because I was talking about
Yes.
grading papers and how long it takes. And I'd love for you to share your perspectives about how you think kind of an increased focus on testing might be impacting a person's ability to think critically.
Yeah, I just, I wonder because, I've spent a lot of time uh when I was at my last university before I left, I worked with a lot of public school principals that were training to go back into the workforce,
Mm-hmm.
but mostly higher ed. But when I worked with those public school principals, what was so fascinating for me and between their experiences and my own experiences as a parent of kids in public K through 12 is the shrinking timeline that teachers have to give space for kids to critically think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes it interesting, right? So, I remember when I was a faculty member at GW, I taught lots of courses on leadership, specifically intercultural leadership in higher ed and other places. Well, let's say I carry the regular full load of a faculty member that has maybe, let's say, four courses. And in those four courses, my course is popular. So I might have 25 or more students in those four courses. So
Mm-hmm.
that means at least 100 students. And some of the exercises or assessments that I use to help them critically think might be writing a well-researched, documented, cited paper. Well, I don't have a lot of time to read 100
Mm-hmm.
papers that are 5+ pages in order to grade them before the system requires me to record the grades for the course and for the assignment. So I may change the assignment to a multiple choice test or a
Mm-hmm.
open-ended short essay exam because it's quicker and easier to grade. That doesn't allow more time for my students to critically think, which means they can leave my class with a great grade depending on what they absorbed from what I gave them in the limited time I had to give them. But that doesn't
Yeah.
mean that they're well equipped to critically think. I feel the same thing is happening with students in K through 12. My children have never been in a class that has been less than 25 kids. The past 2 years, my both of my sons, my oldest son in middle school and his advisory class, which if you're old school like us, that used to be called homeroom, y'all, in the United States. Homeroom advisory, well, he's got 30 kids in that class. Kendrick had 29 kids in his class. And so there's not a lot of time to create assessments for students to be able to critically think in that way. And then when you're talking about public school, depending on your state's requirements, teachers also have a shrunken academic calendar because at particular points in the academic year, they also have to administer standardized tests, which means they also have to prep their students for those standardized tests. So when I
Mm-hmm.
thought about 28 academic weeks in the public school calendar year, and both of my children were in rising up grades. So that means they're rising up to the next school. So fifth grade, rising up to middle, eighth grade, rising up to high school. Well, at that point in the state of Maryland, they have to have subject matter standardized testing for every subject, 5 subjects. So you got 28 academic weeks in the year. let's say 3 to 4 of those weeks are for the testing itself, then another 4 to 5 weeks are prepping to take the test, then how much time do you really have left to teach other things that allow your kids
Right.
to critically think? Not much. And so I think it starts early. Um, I think it's a bifurcated process, like you said, where it's, I just want the right answer type of environment rather than thinking of uh, a menu of right answers depending on the
Mm-hmm.
nuance. And Lisa, you and I both have walked in together into adult professional development and
Mm-hmm.
training where we literally had to help participants to unlearn a binary, let me just do the right thing answer versus let's talk about the plethora of right things that you can do in
Right.
right context because it requires you to think more critically.
Mm-hmm.
What we do is we end up having non-critical thinkers in K through 12, especially in the US, that just grow up to be adults that also do not critically think. Just like
Yeah.
we talk about bullying and everything else that we haven't figured out in those younger ages, they just grow up to be adults doing the same thing in a different format. There
Mm-hmm.
has to be a right way. I have to get it right. There are no nuances to the rightness or the wrongness or the inappropriateness or appropriateness. And I think that's the challenge. Sometimes it's because of expediency and sometimes because we don't start early enough doing it.
Yeah, and I think expediency is definitely something that's hitting related to access to news because a lot of people get it from social media because it's quick and they're on there already. And I think that's just the absolute worst
Yes.
place to get your news. And the only way you can really understand if a viewpoint that you
Mm-hmm.
appear to agree with is kind of a robust and well thought out viewpoint is to look at multiple
Mm-hmm.
sources of news. So go to different newspapers, different TV stations and see how all these different people are writing about the issue. And if they're all coalescing around roughly the same position, then you know that you're
Mm-hmm.
probably, have your facts straight versus focusing on this outlier. Because
Mm-hmm.
and that is another thing that I think impedes critical thinking is emotion and our feelings. It feels
Oh,
right,
goodness, yeah.
Shaunna. It feels right. Doesn't could be like 120% untrue, but it feels right, therefore it must be true. Well, that's not how it works. And we
That's
don't
not how
have
it
a
works.
way to discern that, or indeed what appears to be a declining interest in taking the time to know how to do that better, right? Like I don't think that's there for a lot of people. And that makes me sad.
No, no, it isn't. But then too, I think this may be something, and you let me know if I'm way off base on this, Lisa, but I think that that may be something that has been present in non-American education that's just not here, right? So let me give you an
Mm,
example. So when I was going to, I was interviewing, I was on this interview panel to select a new faculty member. And I remember he was this stereotypical white guy that, spent a very long time getting his PhD. He'd spent, I think it was like, I think he almost sunsetted on it, Lisa. So I think it took him about 10 years to get his PhD. And it wasn't a situation where there was financial hardship or, some of the other things that other people experience trying to get that
mm-hmm.
final terminal degree. His privilege was he was able to wander about and be curious about lots of nooks and crannies within his field of study.
Okay.
Meanwhile, he's interviewing for a faculty position in an executive doctoral program where the whole point of the daggone program is to get working professionals in and out expeditiously, right?
Okay.
And so we're sitting on this search committee thinking, we don't think he's equipped for this role because if he comes in as a faculty member that's used to wandering about and he's not understanding of professional doctoral students that don't have the privilege or the money or the time to wander about in an academic program, he may become more of a hindrance than a help to
Right.
folks' completion. And so he ultimately did not end up getting hired for the position. And part of the reason why I know this is because he studied elsewhere. He studied at Oxford and a couple other places that were not in the US, where he had the money because he had the fellowship and he had the time to wander about in ways that lots of American students don't have that luxury. And so, the curiosity, it's like, do you have the luxury to have that curiosity? It goes back to what you even said before, Lisa, where when we were in the pre-election cycle of making sure that folks were educated voters, and you brought up,
Hmm.
well, wait a minute, the single parent with 3 jobs trying to raise small kids and get to work on time doesn't have time to read every single
Right.
speech of a political candidate. And so, with that, how do we normalize curiosity? Because it sounds like curiosity is only afforded to the privileged.
Yeah, and I think curiosity is apolitical, right? I think critical thinking
Ah, there
is
you go. Okay.
apolitical. Like
Okay.
I don't think the left is necessarily more able to be curious or have critical thinking than the right per se. So I think it's a value that isn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily only gained through formal education. I think anyone can tap into that if they have a mentor or even
Oh,
into
yeah.
so
Yeah.
this goes back to even your K through 12. Like most but not all kids go through some kind of schooling when they're younger, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the earlier we embed that value of curiosity and critical thinking, then even if they have to leave school at 14 and they don't get their high school diploma or whatever, they've had this kind of like baseline principle established for them that may then as they get older and they
Mm-hmm.
start, like it stays with them kind of thing. But I don't,
Mm-hmm.
I do think I do think, yes, curiosity um, is a privilege, but I think it might only be manifest that way because we don't do enough with very young people, right? Who are kind of
Absolutely.
a captive audience before they kind of
Mm-hmm.
grow and disappear and go off and do random different things. So,
That's
um,
right. That's
the
right.
other thing I will say before I wrap this up is when I went through my undergraduate education in the UK, my
Mm-hmm.
discussion or like what were what were they called? Like the time that we met as a group to talk about the material, they had a particular name. 8 people, maybe. Like
Oh,
I'm
wow.
there's no like big lectures. I had a big political science lecture,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
actual opportunities where you digested and discussed the material max 8
Mm-hmm.
students. I don't know if it's still like that, but so that's another difference, right? In college in the US, the classes are often much bigger than that, or you're going to these huge 200 people lectures. I mean, that was never my experience. So,
Wow. Wow. Wow.
yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Undergrad for me, some of my uh, required courses easily had 200 people in them, but when it
Mm-hmm.
came to some of those discussion groups, haha, were they even offered?
They weren't even offered yet. Seminar, that was it. They were all called
Yeah,
seminars. Yeah.
seminar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so
Yeah.
every class I had a seminar and it was always small. Always small.
I don't recall ever even having one.
Yeah.
I don't recall. Mm-mm.
So there it
So,
is. That's a piece of it,
yep.
probably.
Yep, absolutely. We'll have to pick up later, Lisa. We need to make a note of what you were mentioning around also maybe some of the fear of the curiosity, which goes back to the drum that we continue to hit around
Mm-hmm.
book banning and other ways that we prevent
Yes.
people from being
Yes.
curious. So
Yes.
we can go back to that in a different way later, but that's another thing, oh my God, if my kid reads this LGBT book, then they're going to turn gay. Excuse me.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Yeah.
If my Christian kid reads this book about voodoo, then they're gonna,
Yeah.
yeah. Let's circle back to that
All
later.
right. Okay.
All right, let's get into phase two. Phase two. So, oh, Lisa, I am trying my best to actually rest as resistance in lots of different
Mm-hmm.
ways, right? And at the same time, I can never get away from diversity, equity, inclusion, thoughts, concepts, theories, so forth. And so I spent quite a few weekends ago watching Tyler Perry's movie Straw on Netflix.
Okay.
And part of the reason why I watched it, again, here I go again. I'm not usually a Tyler Perry-ish fan, except for you and I both watched 688, for example, which was
Mm-hmm.
more of a documentary feel to it. But I just love Taraji P. Henson. She is just, I have studied her background story. I've seen her in a lot of different formats, whether it was a movie or a recurring role on a series. So I just like to support Taraji. And she's been put on record in regard to the lack of pay equity, especially for Black actors. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to be supportive. So I watched.
Yeah, for sure.
And in this particular movie, the name is Straw. Taraji plays the role of Janiyah Wiltkinson. She is a single mother living in low-income housing, has a special needs child that's dealing with some form of epilepsy. And the entirety of the movie or the plot is, you know how people kind of flippantly say, oh, this is a comedy of errors, like, something wrong happens, something wrong happens, something wrong. Similarly, misunderstanding after misunderstanding after misunderstanding.
Okay.
And all she really wants to do is get her paycheck from her grocery store job, which was $521, take it across the street to the bank to get it cashed where she's been before. And there was a problem with cashing that check to pay for her daughter's lunch and to pay other bills, including her late rent. Okay. So all this kind of breaks down into the plot. And so I encourage you, if you have not seen it, I would encourage you to do so. Um, Interestingly enough, I don't even know whether to give you all a trigger warning or not, because for some people, they were like, oh, this is literally a trope of Black women that we've seen commonly, so it shouldn't really trigger you. But then I've had other people who did social work and had other experiences where it was deeply triggering. So I don't
Mm.
guess I should, just in case. But take it slow if you choose to watch it. Take us, even if you can only watch it in 20 or 30-minute increments. But after I dug around a bit, Lisa, I found out that there was another movie that premiered at the 2022 Sundance Film Festival that specifically um, talked about a Marine veteran. His name is Brian Brown Easley. And he was denied $892 in benefits. And so he literally took control of a bank in a moment of desperation to make sure that he got
Mm-hmm.
money back to his daughter. Now, some of the difference between these two movies, even though they're kind of on parallel train tracks here, Janiyah was not robbing. Remember what I said, misunderstanding after misunderstanding.
Yep. Yep.
So these stories are very parallel. Now, what I think is interesting is that, again, here we go with curiosity, Lisa. Hopefully, I was being curious with my critical thinking about how I felt regarding to this.
Uh-huh.
So, of course, I take to the socials. All right. I'm looking at Instagrams, I'm looking at Facebook, I'm looking at all kinds of stuff. And of course, I'm not expecting everyone to agree with my glowing report of how deep and impactful the movie was. But at the same time, I wasn't expecting straight up vitriol either, Lisa. I mean,
Okay.
it was several camps of understanding of the movie. So you had some folks who said, I didn't even watch it, and I'm on the verge of boycotting that movie because Tyler Perry seems to create and support continued Black woman tropes. So I didn't even watch the thing. That's
Okay.
one camp. Another camp was, look, I don't care if Tyler Perry comes on and he's singing Mary Had a Little Lamb. I'm watching everything he does because I support Tyler Perry. That's another camp. Then you had people like me who, like I said, I've only watched 688, but this man has tons of, huge body of work. And I turned it on hesitantly thinking that it could go into a trope, but as I continued to listen, I'm like, ooh, this one is different. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. We have got an award winner here for several reasons. And so now I think what's interesting, Lisa, and I know that, some people obviously will feel differently, but I'm wondering, Lisa, when it comes to just art in general, because this
Mm-hmm.
is a form of art, I still feel like I'm on the fence in regard to is kind of beauty in the eye of the beholder when it comes to this type of thing, right? Because on one hand, I could legitimately say, here we go again, similar to other movies we've talked about in regards to domestic violence, gender-based violence, where, oh my goodness, am I consuming entertainment um, at the downfall and at the price that another Black woman is paid?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I simply appreciating art and I'm grateful that these narratives are being told? Because what's worse is that when these stories aren't told.
Right.
Um, or should I just divest entirely and say, look, y'all enjoy, I love Taraji, but I can't watch it. Now, the movie has been #1 on Netflix around the world for a good bit of time now. So somebody's watching it along with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just wondering, Lisa, this takes us back to, you know, this to me is divisive art in a good way. And I'm just wondering if it's useful. Especially when you and I talk all the time, especially from a phenomenology perspective of we need to tell more stories, tell more narratives, tell more, give more perspectives, that kind of kaleidoscope of different angles on the same thing, because the stories aren't being told to begin with. I just want to make sure I'm not part of exploitation, especially if it's divisive art that's meant to be seen differently, but may be harmful to the very groups I'm a part of. I have no easy answers for this, but
Right.
I just wanted to support Taraji, and here I am on the podcast with you.
Is it do you know Tyler Perry's intention by engaging with some of these tropes, Black women tropes in this storytelling?
Well, here we go back to the both and, Lisa. I think two things can be true at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler Perry is, I believe now he's either a billionaire or close to a billionaire. So of course, he's not running a nonprofit film studio here. I mean, obviously, he's here to run a business. Um, so of course, that's one intention. But I know another intention too is that you get creative control and you get financial control because I know Taraji has been on record talking about the lack of pay equity for Black actors and Black actresses specifically. And so I do recall a quick little snippet where Taraji said this. She said, Tyler would never tell y'all, so I have to tell y'all that I read the script. I said, yes, this is me. He said, well, send me your proposal for your price. And he tripled what she asked for.
Mm,
Well, that's another intention too, his
yeah.
contribution to pay equity. So yeah, there's lots of intention going on here, and not all of it's bad. Um, so, I think there's multiple intents that he's speaking to with this particular film.
It's making me think of that movie American Fiction, right? Which we've talked
Uh,
about on the pod
yes.
before, and the ways in which the main protagonist, the novelist, who is African American, writes a book based entirely on white stereotypes of African American people, right? And
That's
it's
right.
like this
That's right.
huge blockbuster. It sells, it gets put up for an award. It's just
Hmm.
such a good movie, such good commentary, right? And so my question is similar. Is Tyler Perry intending to create this division or firestorm through his art to get people
Mm.
to think more critically about the ways in which Black women are treated inside and outside of the film industry, right? Because, like you said, you got this pay equity thing that's happening, but then
Yeah.
in the creative narrative, like
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
or is it or is it just a lazy use of a trope because he knows it will sell with white audiences? You
Or
know?
is it both?
Or is it both? Or is
Because
it both?
I think it may be both.
Mm,
Because it is, I felt that way. That's part of the reason why I hadn't watched anything that Tyler Perry had produced in years, because it felt like the same thing, different day, until
okay.
6 888 and then now this. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the both and piece. But I also think too that consider your audience. What is your audience going to bite? You know,
Right.
your audience may in fact feed the very same trope, or feed the very same stereotype, or feed the same, at least the same avatar of Black women, for example. So now I will say again, this is not necessarily a spoiler either, but for those that choose to at least taste test the movie, if you will, once you get into it, there's an entire spectrum of avatars of Black women once you get in there, and you'll figure it out once you go in. But again, if you're used to his body of work, you may think, okay, it's going to be cookie cutter. It's only going to be one. It's going to be um, some of the regular tropes. And Lisa, let me share too. I got a little bit nosy even when I started thinking about Black women's tropes. I could come up with my own list that I think is appropriate. But even when I
Mm-hmm.
researched, for example, the tropes that are most prevalent in media broadly, y'all will recognize all of them, listeners. The angry Black woman, the Jezebel that is over sexualized,
Mm-hmm.
the mammy slash maid type character, which is why everybody was up in arms with what was said to Kamala Harris when she was told
Right.
she's the mamala of the country. And then kind of a Zora Neale Hurston type view of being the labor mule. If nobody will do the work, the Black woman will do the work in the organization,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, it's not a spoiler, but it shows up in lots of different ways here. And so, yeah, it still does use some tropes, but at the same time, it's still part of his body of work, and it's still what sells, and it still gave a lot of people jobs at the price point that they should have been paid all along.
Right.
So, yeah. It's
Yeah.
almost like when I don't know if your folks did this when you were little, Lisa, but when parents hide the medicine in the applesauce type thing, it
Mm-hmm.
that to me is kind of where it goes in, where it's like, oh, the pay equity part is good, but you got to fold it in something that people don't always think is good. It's got to be kind of mixed in together for people to digest it, unfortunately, rather than people paying Black women as actresses and actors what they're worth, and giving different perspectives, because there's been other perspectives of Black women's lived experiences that people didn't bite, didn't go to see, didn't go support.
Yeah. I wonder though, with Tyler Perry in particular, because of his fame, um, I mean, he is so, so famous and so very much respected. Um, that he has a little bit more flexibility and license to do something more
Mm,
to do something more daring, right? And for it not to
that's
hit
the
him
truth.
in the way that a kind of more quote unquote art house or up and coming independent
Mm.
newer director producer might have.
Oh
So
yeah.
he has latitude that other people don't have. And this is also true of very well known, famous white directors and producers too, right? Like, and so then I think, well, you have this position of power where you could shake this stuff up, right? That could be part of your message. And that's not just his
Hmm.
responsibility. I realize that that's I guess more of a generalized comment to all really high level
Yeah, yeah,
directors and
yeah.
producers, like do something more meaningful, please, instead of
Yeah.
another Marvel movie. I do like Marvel movies,
Yeah.
but like you have the power to do something more meaningful. So
Mm-hmm.
I do see a little bit of the frustration from people who feel like a lot of the medicine in the applesauce is meaning that it is going to fly over people's heads because of the aforementioned phase of a limited set of critical thinking skills among the US population, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
then is he just doing more damage? If we as a viewer, as a culture, don't have great capacity
Yes, 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 yes.
to do that work, then does he unintentionally do more damage by just
Mm-hmm.
reinforcing something?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. And now it's almost like, oh goodness, you've when what's that word? When someone seems to play the same character over and over again.
Oh, typecast.
Yes, yes, yes. So it feels similar to that. It's like he's type producing, like he's
Yeah,
producing similar things over and over again. And so when he departs from it, he's going to miss a bunch of folks that think, oh, it's the same thing, different day, when it's actually not.
when it's not.
And so those that don't have critical thinking and curiosity don't even turn it on to see the first 10 minutes of what
Right.
is it about. I mean, you have the freedom to turn it off when you want to, but to not even be curious enough to see what's going on. I've been that person before. There's
Yeah.
been other films that he did where I was like,
Not
not
even. Yeah.
interested because I think I know what it's about, so let's move on. Um, so yeah, of course, this is his art. This is his life's work. Art is open to vastly different interpretation, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I'm very concerned. And I still think it's a very thoughtful piece. I mean, even the posters that folks, if you all take a look at the poster of Taraji sitting on the side of the bed for the uh, for all the social media for this particular film, it's a intimation of the actual oil painting of Blue Monday, which was also a Black woman, with her head hanging on the side of a
Okay.
bed. So there's lots of thoughtful pieces that go into it from beginning to end, but I just wonder if the point is to create conversation around it. Maybe that's it. Because a lot of art is
Mm-hmm.
so like if you have a piece of art that nobody's talking about, that might be that might be more harmful than quote unquote divisive art that does make people talk and think. And I mean, think about what we talked
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
Lisa, even offline with Sinners, for example, and how much conversation it created
Yeah.
because people interpreted things quite differently. Maybe the point is to be divisive. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know Tyler Perry's work that well, but he doesn't seem to me someone who shies away from conflict necessarily.
Not at all.
So,
Not at all.
yeah,
Not
like
at
so
all.
I think he has that he certainly seems to have that provocative streak. Whether or not that is built into this movie, I guess outside of asking him that question, we will never 100% know, but um
Mm-hmm.
I do just want to
Mm-hmm.
circle back to your earlier point around what does it mean to create entertainment off of someone's pain, and
Yes, yes, yes.
which characters or people with a collection of certain identities are the ones that are who have their stories of pain most often told for entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I don't say
Most often
entertainment,
told. Yes,
yeah, like
yes.
laughter, but like entertainment, like I'm gonna pay and go to the movie and be entertained for two
Mm-hmm.
hours, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
about it, right? Like the triumphant stories tend to always be white dudes, and the sad, shitty, bad things that happen to you. Um, Although there is often that narrative of, but they came through it, all this adversity, right? Tend to be Black women, Black men, Native Americans, Indigenous Americans, women, gay people,
That's
right? Like,
right. That's
um,
right.
and
Mm-hmm.
so in that sense, I haven't seen Straw, but obviously there's some bad stuff that's happening in the movie. And so it's just another,
Mm-hmm.
beyond the tropes that you mentioned, it's just another narrative that is a marginalized person being presented in a marginalized way versus in a
Yeah.
triumphant way. So
Oh
I just
yeah.
didn't want to
Oh
lose that
yeah.
point that you'd brought up earlier, because I think that's
Hmm.
important for us to think about too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you were right in what you said. I mean, remember, for those that aren't familiar with his work, um, Tyler Perry has no problem with being controversial. He actually bought a Confederate Army base, Fort McPherson, 330 acres of land in order to build his production studios on it. So in Georgia, hello. So, not avoiding controversial conversations because I think that's where if like I said, if you're doing things that people aren't talking about, then that may be a lack of creativity in and of itself, that you're not willing to do things differently than others have done before. And at the same time, you know, I think you're on to something big in whose story is consistently being overtold as the hero and undertold as the hero. I guess if there's a word for that,
Mm-hmm.
because it consistently seems to be groups that you and I are part of, Lisa, and other groups.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I appreciate that perspective too. That's great. All
All right.
right. Well, look, the both and of this conversation is just got my mind exploding at this point because I can see even more and more both and around me.
Mm-hmm.
But for those of you that have been listening to this podcast, thank you for listening to yet again another podcast. Please make sure that you share you'll see us on all of your social media sites, podcast apps, so forth. You'll find us there under Unfazed Unedited. You can certainly email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com or visit our website, unfazedpodcast.com, to find all the old and the new shows. So if you liked this week's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, share with your friends, coworkers, or any others in this phase of your life. So until next time, Lisa.
See you next time.